Hey everyone, this is Kathy Beal of EmpowermentUnlimited.net with a brief look at what the fall holds for the United States of America based on the September autumnal equinox chart of September 22nd. And this is a briefer version of something that I elaborated on in my Patreon earlier today in a fuller discussion of the equinox. So what I've done is I've set the chart for Washington, D.C., and it encapsulates a bunch of the issues that are already in play and that are going to be defining the midterms. I want to draw your attention to a big pile up down here in the fifth house that has to do with children. The equinox happens when the sun moves into the sign of Libra. And this year, when it does that, it is right on top of Mercury, the planet of communication, which is retrograde at 0 degrees Libra, meaning that the issue of past agreements, past laws, Libra is laws, past court decisions, Libra is the courts, past alliances, information from the past, all of that coming up and being a huge factor for the following 3 months. And women, well, let's say, and children, fifth house of children and creativity being a part of it. So there may be the role of creative media in this, but for more importantly, I do see women and this Mercury and Sun conjunction is opposite Jupiter in Aries in the 12th house of hidden things. So there are all kinds of influences in the background that are blowing this up, exploding it, making it really, really huge. And big issues of individual stuff going on behind the scenes as opposed to what is being agreed or dealt with out in public. Let's look at other things in that fifth house. And what I find really important is Venus, which represents our values, also the role of women in Virgo, health consciousness, proper boundaries, who's in control of what. And it is opposite Neptune in the 11th house of group associations, which represents Congress, which represents the different legislative bodies. So there is an issue here about boundaries, about religiosity, with Neptune and Pisces being there, and with women possibly being martyrs or victims or fall guys. And this being a huge factor in the next 3 months, starting with the equinox. Now, this is not surprising given that the midterms are going to fall during this 3-month period. Other things that are going on with that Venus is it's in a trine, which is a really easy flow of energy with Pluto in Capricorn. Pluto in Capricorn is deconstructing institutions, but it's also got a lot to do with corruption and things coming out about, well, let's say dark money, maybe. And it's on the doorway to the U.S. 10th house of its public role, or bringing things out into the public eye. And Pluto is in the 9th house of laws, legislation, the courts. So this is another factor saying that what's going on with women's rights will be a huge and defining and like turning point issue in what happens in the next 3 months. And again, the midterms are smack in the middle of it. Interestingly, so the moon, which represents the people and the general mood, is in an adjustment aspect to that Pluto in Capricorn. And the moon is the other body that is in the 5th house of children. And it is ruled by the sun because it's in the sign of Leo. And so that's really, so they're all in it together, because let's just look at this. The moon is in Leo, which is ruled by the sun. The sun is in Libra, which is ruled by Venus. Venus is in Virgo, which is ruled by Mercury. Mercury is in Libra, which is ruled by Venus. So it's all this giant round robin of energy having to do with values, how we feel, the information that we have, and the role of children in our lives. And I'm going to say this is big because Pluto's part of it: abortion rights, healthcare rights, bodily intactness rights, big and ongoing issues. Mars, the counterpart to Venus, Mars, which rules our drive and also how we push ourselves out in the world, and the masculine element is in Mercury's sign of Gemini. Mars in the house of values, Mars in the house of resources and the economy, in a very communicative sign. It's in a challenging aspect with that Venus. It's a square, so lots and lots of talk, lots of information, lots of who knows what. Mars is in a square to Neptune, so there could be confusing information, highly religiously motivated information, things being cast in a certain way, or a lot of talk about this. What is the role of women? And actually, if you look at those three bodies, they are forming a T-square, which is a dynamic configuration, and the pressure is on that Mars in Gemini, so it's not going to be a quiet time. There'll be tons and tons and tons and tons of talk back and forth, but it's not all every which way, even though Gemini is how many directions can we go in at once, because that Mars is in a trine and easy flow with stabilizing Saturn in Aquarius, Saturn bringing structure, outer rule, outer order. This might have to do with, this could be executive orders. There could be a lot of talk about the economy, about values, about how we use our resources, and things kind of settling down, stabilizing. Although with Mars, there's always an assertive, argumentative fighter element to it as well. So that could also indicate the kind of constant complaining that you hear, or the attacks on the executive branch, which the 10th house rules. Saturn and Uranus are in an ongoing square, which is pitting old ways against new ways, structure against anarchy. This could be indicating the courts or the executive or something in the federal government trying to rein in the insurrectionist vibe, insurrectionist urges, insurrectionist activity that has occurred. Additionally, one thing that's important to know about this is that Saturn and Uranus have been traveling in this action demanding relationship since early in 2021, and they will come close to completing their fourth of four squares, final of four squares, on October 4th, a month before the midterms. They won't exactly complete it, but they'll be really, really close. And the pressure of the buildup colors the 3 months out of this. So even after they move apart from the actual square, we'll still be feeling of stress testing of structures, of what we're doing with resources, of the economy, of values, of how we're going to change things. This is potentially indicating more New Deal-like activity coming out of the White House, because Uranus was in Taurus during the 30s, during the New Deal. And this is a driver for more and more and more legislation and action, bringing innovative solutions, breaking apart the way things have been done. And could just be a lot, indicating a terrific amount more squabbling coming as well. Let's not be overly optimistic here. Now, interestingly, when I put the equinox chart around the US chart, it gets really, really revealing. I'm using the July 4th chart. I'm not going to get into an argument over which one is correct. This one has been used so much that I do believe it has a lot of validity. And notice that the Sun Mercury conjunction in the ninth house of our belief systems, laws, the courts, in the sign of the courts, um, foreign affairs is coming up against the doorway to our public world. So there will be a lot of information and talk and documents, that's Mercury, about our alliances, our allies, what situation we're in. And I think this also indicates dealing with the ramifications of disclosures of papers having to do with the secrets of other countries. I think that's a factor here. We'll see a couple of other things dealing with that. And and it's not anything that's going to go away. And it might be much, much bigger than we think because of Jupiter blowing everything up with its opposition. But the thing that jumped out at me immediately and that I find most striking is that Venus in Virgo in the equinox chart is directly on the US Neptune in the ninth house of belief systems, laws, legislation, foreign arrangements, but also our court system. And that Neptune in Virgo speaks to separation of church and state. It speaks to maybe some idealism and maybe some deception about what all these things mean. Venus on top of that pulls the women's issues, the women's bodily intactness issues, and the values of what separation of church and state stood for into play. And it is opposite Neptune in the sky, Neptune in Pisces. So big issues in just baked into the equinox and baked into the coming election about the role of religion, what we value, what kind of borders we have, boundaries we have with other countries, the intactness of all of these things. And again, I think this speaks very much to the abortion rights issues. That Venus and that Neptune are in a trine with Pluto in the second house. Pluto moving up onto the third pass of the US Pluto return, which will actually be exact in December. The Pluto return is Pluto coming back to the spot it was when the Declaration of Independence was signed, and bringing up all kinds of issues having to do with what we value and what the ground rules are, and bringing everything up for deconstruction, tearing down, and putting back in another way. This could bring a lot of, this could be more of the dark money and the big forces and people with extreme wealth disparity being a factor in this whole time period. Hang on a second, I've got to get my notes. Additionally, all right, let's look at, we got Saturn, we got a grand trine, which is an easy flow of energy in air, which has to do with mental disparate, like not highly emotional at all. So there's a grand trine involving Saturn in the sky at 19 degrees Aquarius in the second house of resources and values. And it is trining Mars in Gemini in the sky in our seventh house of partners, allies, and open enemies. And that is trining Saturn in the US Saturn in Libra in the 10th house. That's our judicial system, for one thing. Also the executive branch. So there's this easy flow, and Saturn's in two parts and Mars is on in one part of it. Well, there may be a lot of assaults on or talk about what the various roles are supposed to be. There is certainly litigation that would significantly undo voting rights. It's coming out of North Carolina, something going up before the Supreme Court. Probably decision would not be announced at all before the midterms, but this is something that will be going on in the background with an outlier legal theory that would throw ultimate decision over elections to state legislatures and completely rip out the rights of state courts to review anything. Yes, that does exist. That theory does exist. It's, again, it is outlier. But this also speaks to government, Saturn in two places, government and also the courts being connected with information either involving allies or situations involving an open enemy. And I'm just going to throw out there that Mars at 17 Gemini is right smack on top of Trump's Uranus. So the various ways that different parts of the government are investigating and probably bringing ramifications and consequences in on him. Ongoing theme of the fall. Ongoing theme of the fall. So those of you who have been flipping out, take heart in that. And I will also point out with that the U.S. Saturn at 14 Libra is being opposed by Chiron in the sky at 14 Aries. Chiron, wherever it is. Okay, first off, we're coming up on a Chiron return. If you'll notice that the U.S. Chiron is at 20 Aries. It's not there yet at the equinox. But Chiron in the sky it seems to bring an opportunity or an area where there's a potential for some healing. Aries is very impulsive, me first, unpremeditated, absolute masculine, go, 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 go action, acting as a free agent. This could be speaking to someone going rogue, going out of control. I think that the whole issue of consequences for the former president and what he's done with information will be huge. And by information, that's everything he said, all the levels of fundraising, you name it, that Mars at 17. We'll get to that in a second. Put a pin in it. I'll come back to it. Anyway, I see Chiron in Aries as an embodiment of toxic masculinity, of masculine impulse has just gone into overdrive. And this does look like there's something here that will bring that as an issue and that we'll be dealing with. Now, back to what I said about put a pin in it. This Mars, it's close to a return of the U.S. Mars that'll happen during this 3-month period, and actually several times, because Mars is going to retrograde on at the end of October. But notice that it is squaring, transiting Venus on top of the U.S. Neptune and transiting Neptune, which is a T-square, which puts pressure from both sides onto whatever's up with Mars, energizing that, causing lots of pressure on it, an ongoing issue. And this actually does pull in the women's bodily rights issues, because I neglected to mention that 22-degree Virgo, where the equinox Venus is and the U.S. Neptune is, that is conjunct the moon, which is the people in the Roe v. Wade decision chart. So the whole issue of women having privacy rights really being forced to be talked about, and there may be multiple solutions since Mars is in Gemini. Also with this, I think this does indicate certain, just watch for lots of Geminis in the news, Geminis who've been partners of the US, Geminis who've been open enemies of the US, and having a lot of pressure come down on them during this time period. The final thing I want to mention, well, actually, two more things. So the Saturn Uranus square connects the house of resources and values to the house of, oh, looky, children. I think this echoes the whole old ways, new ways. You know, are we going to quote somebody from England from centuries ago as some kind of legal arbiter, or are we going to look at who has control over their bodies? Ongoing issue. And that is just part of what's up. Now, the final thing I want to mention is that the moon in the equinox chart in the ninth house of legislation, the courts, our basic life philosophy, and foreign affairs, which would include immigration. The moon representing the public mood right now is opposite the moon in the US chart. 26 Leo in the equinox chart, 27 Aquarius in the Declaration of Independence chart. So there may be a lot of things happening that feel very out of touch with who we are as a people or who we have thought of ourselves as a people. I think there's a terrific amount of reevaluation that is showing up in this, particularly because that Leo moon is disposited by the sun, which rules Leo, which is traveling with Mercury retrograde. So lots of rethinking of who we are, lots of rethinking and revisiting of alliances, of our attitudes toward people who are different than us, of foreigners, and a lot of rethinking involving the role of religion. And it becomes, with the moon in Leo, these issues become highly, highly personal and also very fervent. With the moon in Aquarius, the one in the Declaration of Independence chart, they're more of a philosophical construct. Moon in Leo is very real and very, very expressive. So it's an important, important season in US history.